What's hot at PAX Aus 2022?
Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband, changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support. Hey there, welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the podcast where we dive into the big tech news of the week. I'm Adam Turner, and for the first time in a long time, I'm standing right next to the hardest working co-host in podcasting, Alex Kidman. Alex, welcome down south to Melbourne.
Adam, it is great to be here and finally be in a position where I can actually physically punch you if you say the wrong thing.
All right, it takes a few steps backwards.
But, you know, and we've chosen exactly the right week to do this because it's not as though there aren't other big tech stories going on. I mean, it's not like Google's just launched a bunch of Pixel phones or Elon Musk is finally buying Twitter or the Optus data leak keeps on going on and on and on and on and on.
Very quiet, very quiet.
Very quiet, not really that much happening, except, of course, for PAX Aus 2022. And we are joined once again from Kotaku by Ruby McInnes and David Smith.
Hello, everybody.
Howdy.
And PAX is, of course, on again physically in person. It's led into, with Melbourne International Games Week, it is, I think it's fair to say, Ruby, the big games event, not just for games consumers, but also for games developers locally.
I would say one more than the other even. Like, the thing is like you've got Summer Game Fest, which was like the big week for video, big month even for the video games industry as a whole. But realistically, when it comes to Melbourne International Games Week, because, you know, thanks to Vic's screen, Victoria is kind of like the hub of games development in Australia. Melbourne International Games Week is pretty much our Summer Games Fest. And, you know, we've seen so many amazing things happen, such as the Australian Game Developer Awards and PAX, obviously. But, you know, it's a huge week and so much has happened, which is great.
Absolutely agree. It's a different year for PAX. Many of the big publishers are not on the floor this year, which means it's opened up a lot of space for those smaller developers, those indie developers to really get in there and start their stuff. Even on the floor today, it's Friday, we're recording this, it's the quietest traditionally of the 3 days this festival is on. It's already jam-packed among the indies, which is great.
I was going to say, quiet is quite relative as a term here. It's quite packed. Yeah. But you're right, it's a very different PAX from years gone past in terms of that mix of developers and who's here and who's not. I suppose we should note our show sponsors have a very large presence here, in fact, as well.
And I got the high score in 1942. Boom!
Not that he's boasting or bragging or anything like that. In terms of the things that you've seen on the show floor, because it's that great space for Australian indie developers to show stuff off, what's grabbed your eye?
Gubbins. Gubbins is the one that's really, really grabbed me today. It's kind of like Scrabble, but it's throwing random power-ups at you and all sorts of things. It's a word game. I'm loving it. I think it's fantastic. That for me has been the big one.
Yeah, Gubbins is great. It's also it's a word puzzle word roguelite, which is great because it's got little guys in it. That's amazing. Tempopo for me has also been a huge standout just because I love musical games and puzzle games, and it's very cute. I'm a huge fan of Witchbeam. It's hard though, 'cause, I mean, Spiritwell as well has been one that I've been long awaiting. It's hard simply because there is just so much talent, and I could go on and on and on. But like, my advice to anybody going to PAX or, you know, post PAX wanting to check out these games on you know, their given platforms is check out as many as you possibly can. Australia is so full of talent.
Speaking of given platforms, I noticed something that I hadn't seen before. Somebody with a Game Boy game. Is that a new thing?
Oh, I can actually talk about this. So the thing is like, what I find really interesting with a lot of, you know, indie developers nowadays, you can see it on Itch.io that they're working with so many different platforms, including ones that no longer have games actively being made by first parties. So I think Playdate's a really good example of like allowing developers to experiment with older software and like older game mechanics, which is really cool. But you obviously you won't see it with those big developers, but if you just have a look on, itch.io or Game Jolt, you'll see that so many like solo developers or like duo developers, little studios are making old games, making demakes of new games. There's like Elden Ring for the Game Boy, which is so cool. And like the thing is it's surprising to see, but it's also cool to see that like the way that games used to be made isn't dying yet. It's there's still life for the, I guess, the quote unquote traditional way that games were developed. It's just being looked at by a different generation of devs, which is awesome.
There's an element of like design challenge involved as well, where like they're doing more with less, essentially. A lot of these older games were very, very simple, and the hardware they ran on was very simple as well. It's emulating that kind of a vibe for me. We're seeing a lot of Game Boy demakes. We're seeing a lot of like old NES style demakes and things like that as well. I love to see it, and to see more of it here at the show, that's great. It means it's catching on.
Do you think that the indies came out strong from COVID? Do you think being stuck at home was actually a good chance to work on your passion project?
Definitely, 100%. We're seeing the fruits of it here now. Even just in the last 12 months, Ruby and I have been reporting almost non-stop. Like the last time we spoke on the podcast, we were talking about how like there was so few AAA games, big blockbuster games, compared to what we usually play year to year. And into that space came the indies. We're still playing them. There's so many to get through. There's so many here at the show. Like we're kind of spoiled in that regard. They've come out of COVID huge.
Well, that's the thing. Like on that note of like not a lot from AAA, but a lot from indie is like, a lot of these AAA studios, they do have the capabilities to work from home now, but when COVID was just starting, it was a panic. So people just went home, but a lot of these indie developers, they have no choice but to work from their home. They've got no studio. They've just got, their computer and their knowledge. So like, you did see a lot of games coming out of COVID, and I think a lot of these were passion projects that came out of just when they had time, and COVID brought a lot of time, which was, good for me because I love indie games and I love trying out all this new stuff.
One of the things that's actually really impressed me in walking through the indie area, both for video games and board games even, is I can look at something and go, all right, okay, that's a 3D platformer, that's a puzzle game. You can classify them fairly quickly in your head, but then you look that little bit deeper and you go, hang on, there's a really cool twist on this. It's not just they're making another Zelda, they're making another Tetris or that kind of thing. There's some really clever ingenuity and a huge focus, as far as I can see, on games either featuring cats or death or both.
Yep. Yeah. No, a lot of cats. A lot of cats this year.
A lot of cats. See, the thing is, it's so funny because people joke a lot that a lot of indie games nowadays have frogs in them, which is true. Yeah. It is true, but I'm seeing so many cats, and I'm convinced it also has something to do with COVID. It's because, who loves it the most when you're home? Your cat. When were you home all the time? During COVID. People's only inspiration is like, oh, well, I've got this weird little guy around me all the time. I better make a game about him. That is my conspiracy theory. I might be wrong, but I also want to play every single cat game that is available today.
Agreed. There was one that we just saw as we were coming out of the expo hall just before that had a cat in it. It was a little indie game. The title's escaping me.
Schrodinger's cat, or
that was what it was. Yeah.
Schrodinger's cat burglar.
Schrodinger's cat burglar. That's what it was.
So you're not sure whether or not you've been robbed?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. No, not until I play it anyway. And we're going to go back and play that one in a little while. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Very excited. Very excited. Yeah.
The other thing actually that I've noticed, it's been really, really pleasing to see, is a lot of games with distinctly Australian elements in them. Because it used to be that, the only things that you'd see would be fairly terrible AFL games and maybe a mascot platformer. But there are games with Indigenous culture in them. There was a board game I walked past literally called Drop Bears. Everything from Australian satire through to Indigenous cultures being represented here, which I also think is a really, really strong thing for representing Australian game crafting, I suppose.
There was one game that we've been keeping track of this year called One Dreamer. It's a single developer game. He's been working on it for many, many years at this point, and it has become a game about the passion project. It's become a game about exactly what this developer has been going through, trying to build this game on his own, get it out of his mind and into his computer, turn it into something playable that people can interact with. It's really smart, it's really special, it's heartbreaking, but it's also very funny. Definitely one that really promotes mental health, particularly within the game dev scene in Australia. We really love it. If you haven't had a chance to play it, it's on Steam. Please check it out.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to you're seeing more Australian games with Australian stories and Australian themes and stuff, it's like nobody else is going to do it but Australian developers, right? Like we're unless, an American developer decides to make a funny game about, Drop Bears was the first thing that came into my head, but like usually when I've seen like American representations of Australians, it's usually like, just wringing the neck of whatever stereotype for Australians they can find. And with Australian developers, they know, Australian stories, and what it basically whittles down to is like we're never gonna or very rarely going to see a non-Australian game developer make a game about Australia, influenced by Australia, or include Australian themes that aren't just stereotypical or disingenuous. So like it's very cool to see people in the Australian games industry making games in general, but it's also cool to see them taking influences from the beautiful country that we have, but as well as that, seeing all the First Nations representation and Indigenous themes in games, and also just a simple acknowledgement of country at the start of a game is just gorgeous, because the thing is like if you're gonna make an Australian game to ignore the fact that this is stolen land and the influence that First Nations people have on the country as a whole wouldn't make much sense. So it's cool that we're also seeing a rise in respect for Indigenous people in the Australian games industry as well. Yeah.
We've seen a smaller title this year as well called Dinkum that came out. Again, we were talking about games that came out of COVID. This was very much a game that came out of the COVID era, very much based on Nintendo's Animal Crossing. Little guy moves to a little village in the middle of Australia, in the outback. Red soil, Australian animals everywhere you look. But exactly as Ruby says, did not pay proper attention to the Indigenous experience, essentially. And it was the sort of thing that was only pointed out after launch. It was really valuable for that developer. They've put a lot of effort into the game, into turning that ship around, in a sense, to really think about the Indigenous experience, particularly in a game set in the outback, and what it would mean to settle in an area like that, to in effect colonize an area like that. A really smart game. They just didn't think about it quite far enough. It was that extra step, and that's the sort of thing, like there's been a lot of learning in that regard in the Australian game space this year, and we love to see it.
We were chatting to Alice Clark last week about the Together Lounge, another excellent space.
The Diversity Lounge.
It used to be the Diversity Lounge. It is now the PAX Together Lounge. They rebranded.
I love that way more.
Yeah, it's excellent. It's an excellent space. But she made the comment that PAX can be so many different conventions for different people. And we haven't even touched, for example, on panels. I know the two of you are doing some panels. What's the panel experience like from the audience, the non-audience facing side?
Ruby was just on her first panel a moment ago.
Hang on, say that again.
Ruby was just on her first panel a moment ago.
And not just that, but this is my first PAX, so it's like it's weird to go to my first PAX where I am also on 3 panels. That it's scary. It is a scary experience, but that doesn't mean that it's also amazing. And it's interesting because like I wouldn't consider myself an expert in my field, but I would consider myself an expert on my experience in my field. So when being on a panel talking about writing about games, the only place I could come from was from my experience in the industry in the past year, and I think I got that across really well. It was nerve-wracking, but also I saw people nodding, so I guess I was making some good points. But it's super exciting, and also that was one where I was able to make people laugh, but also explain my experience of being a new person in the video games writing industry. But then there's also other panels that I'm on where I get to be a bit sillier, so I'm very excited for that. But yeah.
My panel experience is typically the panel begins, I black out for about 40 minutes, the panel ends, and I'm not sure what I've said.
Sounds like most of our podcasts, to be honest.
Yeah, exactly. You know exactly what I'm talking about. I've got a panel later this afternoon. I expect the exact same thing to happen. We're going to be talking about pitching to commercial outlets as a freelancer, so that should be good. Alice will be on that with us.
I might have to attend that one. I need work.
We're just
So, as someone who has been to a few PAXs but would consider himself the gaming newbie of this group, I've noticed sort of changes in the broader layout of the show. And one of the things that I noticed is the mix of hardware vendors changed, and not surprisingly, we've seen more people showing off microphones and headphones. You've got the Yamaha, your Audio Technica is a big Twitch area. How much have we seen that aspect of gaming change what's at PAX as opposed to the last time we saw a physical PAX?
Pretty significantly changed, yeah. There's always been a big hardware presence on the show floor, but this year in particular, there's been a big push towards content creation, Twitch streaming, that sort of thing. Even traditional hardware makers like HyperX, who usually do RAM and M.2 hard drives and things like that, are now producing microphones and monitors. It's the sort of thing I would not have expected to see the last time we were here in 2019, definitely. Even at other stalls just across the way, Lenovo, Republic of Gamers, they're all traditional hardware makers who are now leaning into content creation. Really, really different, really, really wild, particularly for a show like this. Clearly, there is a massive demand for it.
And I can't speak to it as someone who went to the last PAX, but I can speak to it as somebody who's seen a trend. I think what has kind of pushed this, the hardware makers making a lot more streaming gear, I hate to say it, it was COVID, it was the pandemic, because everybody was at home and a lot of people started streaming. There were, so many new people on Twitch, and YouTube making content that I think, and a lot of them steered towards gaming. So I think a lot of manufacturers took note of that and were like, we have a new customer to what's the word? Sell to. We have a new customer to sell to and to make things for. And I think it was that time of not being able to leave the house and deciding to stream because you've got nothing better to do that really made the big change.
Which is funny in a way, because so many of those manufacturers, when COVID struck, found that a lot of their gaming lines, if they had them, were selling out because you had all these office workers who suddenly needed good webcams and microphones because they were stuck in Zoom meetings as well. But speaking of meetings, of course, the other thing that PAX is really all about is that gaming community side of things, of people getting together to show off cosplays and seemingly hit me in the head with foam swords a lot. Maybe I just attract them. But of that gaming community get together. And again, how important do you think that is overall?
Yeah, that is such a huge part of this show. We see it in the queue room every single year. I was just inside for the media hour this morning and made sure that I was down this end of the hall so I could watch everybody come in. There was a sense of energy in that room this morning that was immense. It was bubbling over by the time they let them in. People were sprinting through the doors to go and see what was in the expo hall this year. There's such an excitement to be back at this show after not having had it. The expo hall could be empty and they'd be running in there anyway because it's the experience of being here together around so many like-minded people. This show, even from when it started back in 2013, has always been special like that because Australia before that never had anything like this. And so when it disappears even for a couple of years, we take that seriously. And when it comes back, we cherish it again. Really, really important. You're feeling that sense of community absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. Sorry, I think you said it really well. That's all. I think you said that really well.
One of the things that's always struck me about PAX as to as compared to other sort of conventions and things like this that I've been to, is how it's clearly split into two sections. There's the sections for the big brands and the big games, and then there's one whole other half, maybe even more than half, that's your tabletops, your people are in there painting models, learning how to play games. How much of that is as much about PAX as it is about running in to try a new game, a new video game?
It's massive. Tabletop in particular, even during the pandemic, was born back into the public consciousness because people were looking for games they could play at home and offline, essentially. Now that we're back out again, people want to continue that. They still want to gather around the table. There's been this rediscovery of like tabletop RPGs, particularly through like actual play D&D shows like Critical Role and things like that. Because previously, it was really hard to know how to play D&D if you didn't know somebody who already knew how to play it. Now you can watch it on YouTube or Twitch and learn really quickly. Here at PAX, you can jump into a pickup game. That tabletop experience is so, I would say, just as important as like the video game expo hall to the identity of the show as anything else. I spend a solid chunk of my time in tabletop every single year for that reason. There is so much good, interesting stuff happening in that space.
And the thing is, I think it's also a perfect breeding ground for new fans of tabletop games as well, because it's hard to find friends to play a tabletop game with you unless it's like a plan that you've made years in advance. But at a place like PAX, where there's so many different tabletop games on show, and then you've got those pickup play, is that what it's called? Yeah, pickup games available to just jump into. Everyone's really nice here, so like you can just jump in and find, oh, I'm a tabletop game fan now, and it's something that you might have gone into PAX not knowing anything about, which is really cool.
Yeah. They've got whole tables set up for like, exactly as you said, mini painting. They'll give you a free mini and help teach you exactly how to paint it with brushes and washes and all the rest of it. And if you've ever played Warhammer, you know that's how we get you. Like, there's so much of that stuff at this show. Even to go back to some of the older shows, they used to give out, I wish they still did it, they used to give out show bags when you came into the show. And one of the things that was contained in it was a tiny little party game of Jenga. You could set that up in the line, you could play that. They had packs of Magic cards in there as well. People would just be in the line playing these little tabletop games, finding the space to do it. It's so core to what this show is and what it's about. It comes back to that community, that sense of community again. It's really, really important to the identity of the show.
And that area, of course, also has my personal favourite area, which is the classic gaming area, where, in fact, I've discovered, I had this wonderful moment earlier on of someone discovering an old game for the first time. So they've got a ZX Spectrum set up there with Manic Miner, one of the classic games, almost the platform game, as it were. And this family came up, and the kid was asking his dad, "Oh, what's this?" And the dad didn't know. He hadn't seen it before either. They sat down, they started to play. They got absolutely smitten with what is now a 40-year-old game. I watched them for a while, then I walked around the corner to where the pinball machines were and got involved in a three-way battle on the Game of Thrones table. Not even a table I particularly liked, but because there were people there who were passionate, it was just so inviting. It was so easy to say, yep, I'm now getting caught up in just chasing a high score against someone I've never met, will probably never meet again, but it was just one of those wonderful moments.
Yeah. It's wild how, even with the ZX Spectrum, it's wild how, that technology can be so, be considered so old now, but you put it in front of a kid like that, and suddenly it becomes like something from the future. They've never seen it before. Brilliant. I love it. That is absolutely one of my favorite parts of the show. I love that area as well. I haven't gotten to go down there this year to see what's different. I'm really looking forward to it.
Make the time.
I want to. I'm gonna. I can't wait.
So here's a question without notice. One of the things, and it might have just been me, but in the indie area, there seemed to be quite a lot of games that were going for that very old bit, even 8-bit look. Has that always been an indie thing, or has it sort of the mix of indie games changed recently?
It's come back. It's sort of come and gone. There's been different sort of aesthetics that have come in and out of vogue over the last sort of 5 or 6 years. For a little while it was sort of the 16-bit Mega Drive, Super Nintendo look and feel. They're now winding it back further again. We were talking about Game Boy stuff before. And part of it is a design challenge. You're trying to do as much as you can within these constraints. And maybe that's a function of, the size of your development team or your budget or something like that. But At the same time, it also looks and sounds really, really cool. It looks and sounds like a video game. And particularly when you're trying to attract a wide audience, that's a really, really easy way to do it. It screams approachability. People see an 8-bit video game and they think simplistic, but like easy to learn, perhaps difficult to master. And that really, really draws them in. You'll see a lot of that on the show floor this year, for sure.
Yeah, I think a huge thing as well is like accessibility and cost.
Yeah.
So it is probably a lot cheaper. And I wouldn't say easier because it's not easy to make a game in any way, shape or form. But I think for newer developers who are, just getting into the tools made available to make video games, using engines like Game Maker, like RPG Maker, and even Unity are a lot more affordable and a lot easier to use. And at the same time, there is a upwards trend in that sort of old school looking game. We saw that with Undertale, bringing back the old pixel art games. There's always been pixel art games, but I think games like Undertale were a big push in that direction. And as well, from what I've seen in the online indie world, there's a lot of I don't know, I wouldn't say nostalgia bait. I would say nostalgia in general for how PlayStation 1 games used to look as well, like the big polygons. I think it's just it's an artistic thing, really.
If PlayStation 1 is old, then I feel like I'm crumbling into dust here.
No, but you know what I mean. Like the old in a how can I say it without sounding mean?
Old in an old man kind of way.
Older it's not new.
Classic. Vintage.
Yeah, but vintage sounds really old.
But valuable.
Valuable, absolutely. Well, that's the thing. It's like, I don't know, I feel like with these kind of nostalgia, these games that spark nostalgia, I think it's nostalgia that both the developer feels as well as the player. And it's really cool to have that joint experience of this person is making this game look like a PlayStation 1 game because they love the PlayStation 1 games of that era, but as well as that, I'm playing that game because it takes me back to a time where I used to play games like that. Play demo discs for PlayStation 1. You never see demo discs around anymore, but it's cool. It's a joint experience, and it's very cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many of these PlayStation and N64 era sort of demakes coming through, and you're absolutely right. It feels like there is a level of nostalgia from the developers for that sort of era, and maybe challenging themselves to a certain extent to, can I recreate or capture that look and feel in particular? I've seen so many people trying to make something that looks and plays and feels like GoldenEye. Challenging, because GoldenEye was a classic, but it was also a collection of ambition meeting mistakes. Brilliant game resulted of it, but it's hard to recreate that. It's really, really hard to recreate that. So yeah, I'm interested in where that's going for sure. I'm seeing more and more of it.
PAX isn't just, however, about the smaller indie games. There are still some big publishers here. So Sega's here, for example, with a huge furry Sonic mascot. That will make some people very, very happy. What are they showing off?
So we're looking at Ruby's collapsing in the corner. We're showing off a new game called Sonic Frontiers. It's the first sort of open world Sonic game, bit different. It's had some, shall we say, controversy during its development.
I don't know if it's controversy or just people dunking on it. Well, the thing is, when it first came, when we first got a glimpse of it through the IGN gameplay, it looked empty. It looked empty, which was a bit of a bummer for people because they were hoping there was more in it. I've always remained hopeful because I am a Sonic tragic. I also haven't gone in and played it yet, which is tragic. But I feel like with Sonic games, the expectations are high from people who don't play Sonic games, and people who play Sonic games will love anything that comes out. It's a very interesting dynamic, but it's been long. It's long awaited, and I think from what I've seen more recently with, leaks and trailers and whatnot, I think it looks incredible. It looks like a weird mixture between Sonic the Hedgehog and Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is not a convergence I would expect ever in my life, but I love it. I'm super pumped.
I think the thing, though, for long-time Sonic game fans is also they've been hurt before.
Yeah.
I remember Sonic 06. I am no stranger to that game. The thing is like Sonic has highs and lows. They've definitely been hurt before. Sonic fans are the strongest people I know. So I totally get it, and I think because of that. This is going to sound weird, but there are both low and high expectations for this game. People who are desperate to see an open world, big big new Sonic game come out, but also people who want the game to just be good. For God's sake, be good,
Just get one right, Sega, please.
One. They just want one game to be right. And I have high hopes for a number of reasons. Mainly because Big the Cat is going to be in it and there's going to be a fishing mini game. Like, that sounds amazing to me. But I'm excited to check it out here on the floor, but I feel like Sonic fans will like it.
Yeah.
That's the vibe.
Yeah. I'm the old school Sonic fan, so I'm going back the other way. I'm just like, I don't trust it. It's open world. I don't know what to do with that. Sonic goes in one direction. He goes from left to right across the screen. That's what he does.
Sometimes he goes up.
Sometimes you go up. Sometimes you go up real fast. Yeah. But that's it. Those are the two directions he's allowed to go.
Good point.
Yeah.
Actually, you just touched on something that we discussed the last time the two of you were on the show, which is fishing minigames. Yeah. Because I've not seen all that many fishing minigames. Have we reached peak fishing minigame?
I don't know. I've not actually thought about it, but now that you mention it, I haven't seen that many fishing minigames this year.
Well, they're all demos, and I like to believe that because they're all demos, we have not seen the entire game, and there will be fishing minigames in every single one of these games outside of the demo. Thank you. Good night. That is my take. No, but like, you're not seeing a lot of fishing, but what I was really surprised by is I don't know. Maybe I'm not looking hard enough, but I haven't seen many, if any, farming games.
That's true. Yeah, we were talking about how during even Summer Game Fest, we were seeing so many like farming games. That last Nintendo Direct, so many like farming and cozy games. Not that many here, are there?
Which is really interesting. But like at the same time, I think it also comes down to the fact that like AAA releases, and there are some indie releases in those Nintendo Directs and such, but the AAA spectrum is not a representation of the video games industry as a whole. So like I feel like people are convinced that so many studios are making farming games, but I don't think it's that. It's not everyone, but I was surprised to see that there weren't any. But I might be wrong. I have to look again.
There could be hidden farming games out there that we just don't know about because they've been pushed out by all the cat and death games.
I think I'm surprised by just how many death-related games there. It's quite morbid. I love them, but it's quite morbid, and I feel like these past few years of constantly wondering whether or not we're going to die soon might have been related. Who knows?
How do cults fit into that?
Oh, well, ritual sacrifice?
A cult correspondent, Ruby.
As a cult lover, I should not call myself that. But Kotaku Lamb has a booth that I am obsessed with. I can call them this now. Australian Game Developer Award Game of the Year winners, Cult of the Lamb, are here at PAX, and they've got a really cool booth. I feel like everyone I know has played Cult of the Lamb, but that's only because I have forced them to. Like, I've been like, you have to play it. It's so good.
You certainly didn't have to force me to. But it's a really good example of something that we first saw here. We talked about it the last time we recorded at PAX. It was literally here, I think, as a bunch of screenshots, maybe a little bit of rolling footage, and that was it. Might have even had a different name at the time, I can't recall, but...
I might have an answer for that. I'm pretty sure it was called Sacrificial Lamb at one point.
Yes.
Yeah, I had an interview with Julian where he told me about the original name of the game. And I'd seen so many comments over time being like, I remember when I first saw this at PAX all those years ago, and it is so cool seeing it actually come out. You know, it's had a big journey, and it's kind of, I don't know, I feel like Cult of the Lamb, there are many of them, but like Cult of the Lamb is our current era's like Australian video game industry success story, and it rocks. It makes me really happy.
It's like we've had one almost every year for the last few years running. We had Untitled Goose Game, and then we had Unpacking, and now we've got Cult of the Lamb. We're just doing so much good work year on year. Again, proving the value of exactly what we're seeing on the show floor. Making sure we're getting it into people's hands, getting people to play this stuff, and then keep it in the back of their minds. Exactly as you say, you remember it. Like, you saw Cult of the Lamb, and even if you didn't get to play it at the time, it's stuck in the back of your memory. And so when you actually get to play it, when it comes out and you see it, immediately you're like, I remember that, I'm going to play that. That looks great. And it is.
Well, before Adam's arm falls off as he's being our impromptu microphone stand here, we should wrap up this special episode of Vertical Hold, the podcast that I'm on right now that I nearly just forgot the name of because it's been such a very, very long day. And that means I have to thank our very special guests, David Smith and Ruby McInnes.
Thank you for having us, guys.
Thank you.
And you've both been on the show before, so you sort of know what's coming. The Vertical Hold patented 3 questions of doom. I will ask all 3 questions, and then you can answer them in any order you like. We will go Ruby first, and then David. So, Ruby, where can people find your work online? Where can they find you on social media? And our slightly modified, contentious question du jour. Outside of gaming, when you stop writing for the week, what do you do to relax?
Okay, so you can find me on Kotaku Australia. That's where my work is. Use social media. You can find me on Twitter at Ruby Innes and at r.ubyinnes on Instagram. And outside of gaming, what I do to wind down, it used to be pretend I was dead, but now I read. Sorry, that's so grim. I thought that'd kick off. No,
Ending on a down note.
no. The thing is, I game a lot, and that would, you know, give one the idea that I'm good at them, and I'm not. So practice makes perfect. No, it doesn't. But I read. I do. Which is funny because I'm constantly saying I can't read, but I do read. I'm reading a book at the moment called Little Weirds by Jenny Slate, which is just a fantastic, beautiful book. But as well as that, I also am a big anime head, which hurt to say, but yes, I love anime and I watch that. So yeah.
And David, exactly the same set of questions.
Cool. You can find me online on social media at RuneWords. That's RHUN words. That's across all of my platforms. You can also find me on kotaku.com.au. It's a website. What am I doing with my spare time when I finish work? I'm building Gundam models. I've fallen down the pit of Gundam models. They're incredibly cheap and they're really, really fun to build. It's way less expensive than a Warhammer hobby. I'm honestly obsessed. I didn't think I would be. I can't stop building them. And every time I post about it on Twitter, I get all this positive feedback, which causes me to go and buy more of them. So yeah, that's the current obsession.
See, I have the luxury of being able to say, yes, I do game as the thing that I do when I stop working, because it's not my day-to-day job for the most part. But of course, you can also find us on Twitter at VerticalHoldAU, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au.
And just a reminder for regular listeners, we're thrilled to have Aussie Broadband as our sponsor this year, and they've given us a special promo code which gives new customers a $10 per month discount for 6 months when signing up online for an unlimited plan between NBN 50 and NBN 100. The promo code is vertical, so hopefully that'll come in handy for Australian listeners shopping around for a great broadband service. And thanks for joining us once again out here in the big wide world. Help us spread the good word in 2022. Vertical Hold is proudly brought to you by Aussie Broadband. changing the game with their award-winning network and Australian-based support.